Hey, what's up? This is Jake from chess.com, and we have a game today that shows it is not really good to just block a check to your king by one of your pieces and do not get away from it immediately as soon as you could, because it could become the reason of you losing the game. Just like this game that we have here. This is the game between Nodirbek Abdusattorov versus David Navara in round 8 of the Prague International Chess Festival 2026. So let's look at this game, let's review and see what happens here. David Navara is playing white, while Nodirbek Abdusattorov is playing black. D4 by David Navara, knight f6 by Nodirbek Abdusattorov, c4, e6, and here we have the anti-Nimzo Indian variation for white. White can go knight f3 here, knight c3 here, but then black can go for the Nimzo Indian, the bishop b4, and white does not like it here, so he goes the anti-Nimzo variation, knight f3 for white. So black pushes d5, and now this transforms into queen's gambit decline. After this d5 push here by black, knight c3 by David Navara, and Nodirbek captures the pawn on c4, e4 by Navara, d5 by Nodirbek. So he defends the pawn here by pushing b5, even though this b5 can be captured by this knight here. But then if white captures this knight, and then knight can capture the e4 pawn, and everything is cool for black. So this is still, it's still good for black, I guess. So e5 for Navara, and this knight is attacked. Knight goes to d5, and here we have knight captures a b5 pawn, and the threat of this knight on f6 taking e4 is no longer there, so he captures the b5 pawn. Here black continues to play knight b6, bishop e2 by Navara, knight c6. Nodirbek develops his other knight to b6, to c6. Bishop e3, bishop e7 by black, looking to castle kingside. Knight goes back to c3, castle for Nodirbek. White did not castle here, but a3 for white. Defends the square in case block goes here. Bishop b7. Fianchettos the bishop for Nodirbek. Queen c2, so they're just developing their pieces here. Knight a5. Knight a5 for Nodirbek, looking to go to b3. Here we have h4 by Navara. Knight d5, challenging the knight on c3. Knight g5 for Navara, looking to mate black. Mate in one here if black misses this, but this is kind of obvious for Nodirbek, so goes g6, blunting the diagonal for the queen. Knight takes knight here, and bishop takes the knight, and knight e4. Since the knight is no longer needed on g5, he goes, knight goes to e4, c5. Now here, this pawn is kind of a weakness for black, so Nodirbek pushes this to c5 and plans to exchange this with this d4 pawn, which actually what happened in the game. D captures the c5 pawn, and knight b3 for Nodirbek forks the rook and the pawn. Rook goes to d1, pinning the bishop to the queen, but the bishop takes the knight on e4 anyway, doesn't care if white takes the queen here, then white loses a piece. Say for example, white goes for it, he takes the queen, and black can just take the queen on c2, and white loses a piece and probably losing this game. So this is not really good for white if he does that. So queen takes the bishop instead on e4, and this queen is hanging, so the black queen goes to a5, checks the king. King sidestep to f1. Rook a d8 by Nodirbek challenges the rook on d1. And queen captures the c4 pawn. Rook takes rook. Bishop takes the rook. And here we have knight d2. Royal fork. Forks the king and the queen. White has to take with the bishop. And here queen takes the bishop. Now this pawn is hanging at the same time this bishop. So Navara goes queen c2, defending the bishop and the pawn, offering a queen's exchange. But Nodirbek decline, goes to queen d4. This pawn threatens to be captured by the queen or the bishop as two pieces are attacking it. So White pushes it to c6. Rook b8 by Nodirbek. Nodirbek is counter-attacking White here. He plans to take the b2 pawn as this pawn is not really looking safe on the b2 squares here as the queen and the rook are eyeing for it. Now b4 for Navara. He defends a pawn. By playing b4, now it's defended by the c3 pawn. Rook d8. Looking to capture the bishop on d1 square. And here we have c7. Now, this may seem like black has some tactics here, but there's actually none. If White takes the bishop on d1, White can just recapture with the queen and rook capture the queen, and we have here king goes to e2. King has a one square escape route, so it's not checkmate, and black can take the h1 rook, but again then there's the queen. Pawn promotes to queen, and this will be a hard battle for black if this continues. So not really efficient for black to take the bishop here. So instead he goes rook c8, prevents the pawn from promoting. And here, now these pawns are too far forward for White. White will have a hard time defending this. This queen cannot defend both pawns. And this bishop cannot help as this bishop is operating in the light square diagonal. And this rook. Okay, let's just say rook goes to h3 and c3. But then again, okay, let's go rook h3. Then queen can just take e5 pawn. Rook goes to c3. Defends a pawn, yes, defends a pawn. But then black can go bishop d6 and this pawn. White loses this pawn anyway. So, and aside from that, there's also a tactic here. If White pushes through with the rook h3 and then black can just capture the pawn here. If the white queen captures the rook, then queen takes d1 and it's checkmate. So yeah, instead White plays g3 here, creates an escape route for the king and hopefully utilize his rook. Queen e2 offers a queen's exchange by White. Nodirbek Abdusattorov declines. Instead, he gobbled another pawn on c7. Here, Navara played king g2, bishop f6 by Nodirbek, h5 by Navara, bishop d4, looking to be aggressive on this pawn. Queen e4 threatens to capture the bishop on d4. And here we have queen c6. This queen is pinned to the king, so this queen cannot move away from the diagonal as it's a discovered check. So David Navara did not capture the queen, instead develops his rook on e1. King g7 by black. And here Navara captures the queen and Nodirbek Abdusattorov recaptures with his rook. Rook e2 by white. Rook c3 by black here. Threatens to capture the a3 pawn. a4 for white. Rook a3. Here, pawn captures the g6 pawn and black recaptures with the h pawn. f4 for Navara. Bishop c3 by Abdusattorov. Attacks the pawn. Pawn goes forward to b5. Bishop a5 prevents anything that goes into the square by black. Rook b2, rook d3 attacks the bishop, and bishop e3 by white. King f6, rook c2, and the black rook goes back to a3, attacks the pawn, and here we have rook c8. So this move I did not really understand this move, rook c8. Is this some kind of sacrificing a pawn for a better position for white, or I don't know why David Navara played this move? Rook c8. The engine suggestion here was to play rook c4. But rook c8 by David, this seemed like he's sacrificing a pawn, but actually black takes a pawn here. The evaluation says it's still an equal game. Still an equal game if rook b8. So no one has the advantage even if black captures the pawn on a4. And the Nodirbek Abdusattorov probably calculated this. It probably didn't change much if he takes a pawn. So instead, he goes bishop b6. Just develops his dark square bishop, looking straight for his diagonal here. Here, rook b8 for white, king f5, rook f8, king back to f6, rook back to b8. And here, Nodirbek pushes the pawn, f takes the e5 pawn, king recaptures. And here, rook e8 check, king d6, bishop d1 for white, defends the a4 pawn, king d7 attacks the rook, rook goes to e4, f5, pawn being aggressive on the rook, rook goes to c4, rook a2 check, and here we have this bishop covers the check, bishop c2 covers the check. Now this move is kind of dangerous for white here for David Navara, as this bishop cannot really move because it's pinned to the king. And Nodirbek continued to play e6, king e6 for Nodirbek, and here we have the blunder of the game, g4. So actually, David could play rook c6 here. This is what the engine is suggesting, rook c6, king e5, and you go king h3, or king f1, and you just get away from this pin here. But instead, he goes g4. He was probably thinking, okay, I go g4, you take my pawn, I go king g3, and this pawn is sure dead. This king cannot go to this f5 square, as this white light square bishop is defending this diagonal here. So this is probably what David Navara had in his mind, but actually he missed some calculations here, that there's the move. There is this move. King d5 attacks the rook. Rook goes to c3. King d4. Rook goes to c6, and here the bishop simply goes to c5, blocking the rook from defending the bishop here, and this bishop cannot move. It's pinned to the king. White loses this bishop in no time. And here David Navara losing the bishop. He takes pawn as much as he could. Takes a pawn on g6. Rook takes the c2 pawn for Nodirbek Abdusattorov, and now Nodirbek is winning this game. Before this blunder move, everything was equal. No one has the huge advantage. A slight advantage for black, but not so much. But g4 happens, and now black is up a piece. He takes the bishop on c2 with a check. King goes to g3. Here he captures the g4 pawn, and here a5 for David Navara, not losing hope this game, and hoping to create some chances here. Rook b2 by Nodirbek Abdusattorov, securing this file here. Rook takes a g4 pawn with a check. king c3, b6. Now in this position, what do you do here as black? You're playing with bishop, the rook, and one pawn, and you're up against a rook and two pawns, and white is offering an exchange of pawns. So what do you do here? Will you trade your only pawn for the two pawns and go for a rook bishop king ending versus the king and the rook? If you take this, say you exchange pawns and you take that, the gen evaluation here says it's almost equal game. Black is only up a bishop, and if white is able to exchange rooks here, if white exchanges his rook for the black's rook, then the black king and the bishop will not be enough to checkmate the king here. So this could become a dead draw game. So if you're black here, you don't actually exchange your only pawn. Instead, you just exchange your bishop for the two pawns. You capture the bishop, pawn captures the bishop, and here your pawn recaptures back. And you will be up of a pawn, and your pawn is going to promote this way. Black king is already here waiting for the pawn with an open arms, going to promotion, while the opposite king is far from contesting the pawn here. So black is so much better here. Black is winning. So here, Navara continued to play rook e4, b5 by Abdusattorov, rook f3 check, king b4, king f4, and here rook e2, and here misposition. David Navara resigned in the game as his king cannot cross the side of the board here because there's the rook controlling this file. If he wants to cross, he had to block with his rook here, therefore exchanging both rooks. And black can simply just prevent this white king from ever going to this square here. King can go a3, king d1, b4. If it goes to c1 and go a2, you don't let the queen go here. And black is just better. He's just winning here. White loses this game. So yeah. So that's why black, David Navara lost some hope here as he could not prevent this pawn from promoting. Yeah, so what a solid game for Nodirbek Abdusattorov. This game was fairly even up until the g4 blunder by David Navara, making the black king goes after the rook, which was the only defender of his bishop on c2 that sadly pinned itself just to block the check to the king. It was probably not a good choice for David blocking the check with his bishop there, making it hard for his rook to defend it after the black king and its bishop disconnects the white rook from the bishop and eventually winning and losing the bishop there. So yeah, that's the end of the game. I hope you learned something at least, and thank you for watching and have fun playing chess.